Hey everybody, I'm here with another Q review. I think this is our third one. So yeah, let's just get into it. I had a request to do this game. As you can tell, we've seen these players before. I think this was in the first game. Yeah, so this is Killertofu again and Inazuma. This was requested by Inazuma, so yeah, let's get into it. It's kind of an interesting game. I'm not sure if there's... On the one hand, I feel like there's not too much to talk about because it's a fairly simple game, but on the other hand, there's a couple concepts that I think many Q players might struggle with or find difficult to handle. So yeah, let's get into it. Just for the record, these players are, and I said before that they might be Q players, but they're not. They're pretty close to Dom level. Anyway. So we see a approach and white approaches. This is a little bit unusual because this double approach, like if we think about it, black's gonna get it first, but if we do it, white can get an equal result. But I feel like if this kind of trade happens, you always kind of like think about this in terms of tenuki. It's like who's more severe, who demands a response first. Black's going to get this approach, and there's not really an approach here if we want to do like a really simple tenuki analysis. But even if backing off, that's totally fine. I think this is the better response. The idea here is that white basically has to mean that this is a good exchange or reinforce the R14 stone. If white has to reinforce the R14 stone, then white's overloaded. So white does reinforce it, and black could have come back to attack, right? At the point where black plays this knight's move, back here, white has two places they need to play. They need to help the bottom left and they need to help the upper right. So white's a little bit overloaded in where they need to play, but black chose a much calmer approach, just backing off. This feels to me a little bit passive. The reason I feel that way is on this board, let's say white makes this exchange and then approaches. This double approach, while very big, is also not as strong anymore. Because after black has this move, I'm not sure, I don't think there's really a better place for white to play than to answer. But if, in general, because black already has a stone here, you might think, oh, d4 is even weaker. But the thing is, it kind of gives white a way to handle the stone by leaning on this side. Right, like, I don't know which variation you want to choose. Maybe just like this. This stone becomes kind of out of place. Like, or you could choose a different variation where you descend or something like this. But you kind of end up maybe a little bit over concentrated, right? So like, this is not in a bad place, but if we consider pincering the upper left after you already have these stones here, you might want to go farther or a little bit more severe. So it actually means that it's a little bit easier for white to handle d4 because you've already invested in an extra stone. So because you invest in an extra stone, you have to get more out of the attack to compensate for using a move. So I don't know. I would personally prefer to double approach. It's more severe. But backing off is also not necessarily bad because on this board, even though the double approach isn't so big, there's not really another place that white can play. Like, taking the top is big, but this double approach is still more severe than anything that's going to be happening on the board. So I think it's a fine strategy. White decides to kick. I don't understand this at all. Now, where before we do this, if white had just backed off, right, there are multiple invasions here that white could play, sometimes even high, to isolate the c6 stone. Kicking helps white, or helps black, sorry. It helps white too, but it helps black more. And after black answers, now these invasions don't really exist. If white invades here, black can, at worst, play this cross-cut shape, which is fairly common with a force-based extension, if you don't know it. I'll probably cover it in another video, but the basic idea is because of the placement of these, the liberties of the stones that would be a tarring get shortened, which means that it's actually quite hard to take advantage of this shape as a white. Or here, but again, like your stone is under attack, right? because you've made black a bit stronger if you ever come in here later. So I don't think this kick is a good idea. My feeling is white was afraid that if he backed off, then maybe black would take the corner. But this is not so big, right? If we look at this, this is a decent result. White has Sente. I think black's shape is very nice, but white can still come in, or even attach. And if white plays just very simply, I don't think the board is really bad. I think black might have a slight edge because of the little strange early play here, and I think the bottom left was bigger, but it's not a huge deal. So white kicks. This is the variation, and this is normal, but C11's in a good spot, and black reinforces the corner. This is natural. Black is starting to develop the top moyo, but wants to emphasize the corner, right? This formation in the upper left is a very common formation in the Chinese and mini Chinese shape, and it just kind of, because it's close to the corner, and reinforces the strength here. Black doesn't want to, say, play this very common looking move. This is also possible, but in this case black wanted to emphasize this bottom moyo. And we see maybe C11's a little far. There is some potential for like a reduction or a little bit of an attacking invasion. So by reinforcing the corner like this, this becomes even harder to do, because this space over here will be even harder to handle since it's closer to the corner compared to this far extension. And I think now this is a very common thing I see in games. Sometimes it's a good idea to jump here because it limits black space, and sometimes it's bad because after black plays, you don't have a good next move, and this right side is now open, right? Generally speaking, the reason you don't see this is if you imagine for a second you had just defended the right side, and then black jumps up here, right? Your group is now very strong on the right. It has a base, plenty of I shape, totally fine. So you can invade black and not have, there's a forcing move here, but it's very minor, right? You don't have to worry too much about this group on the right. And you already have a little bit of profit. When you play like this, well, if you invade the right, the top I mean, and this gets settled somehow, then when black comes over to the right side, you didn't get points here, and this group demands a response now. It's not so strong. You have to take the corner or something. Or black could take the corner and force you to extend, right? This is not as weak, it's not as strong, so it's can be forced. Whereas this one, this, sure, it's not great, black comes here, but this is attackable. You don't have to you're not really forced to do anything. If it was really important, you could tenuki. I mean, sure, this is a little bit painful. This is on a vital point, but you're still okay. You can ignore it for a move. You can even do this kind of thing. You're still okay. So the jump here is really heavily emphasizing, you're basically giving up that little bit of I shape and territory in order to say, I'm reducing black. That's what you really want to do. The problem here is that it doesn't, because black can still cap. So if you're going to do something like that, maybe it's better just to make yourself solid first. Maybe it's better to play something defensive. Or just go in and reduce directly, something that goes all the way. So a shoulder hit, an invasion, because this group over here has Miai to, not there, Miai to make life, right? You can go one or the other, you can attach on top if you're concerned about the center. So you could just go in if you want. The problem is this move tries to do something, gives up a little bit to do it, but doesn't actually accomplish its goal very well. So that's why this is not a great move. Black caps and white defense here. This is kind of a byproduct of what I was saying. White's not defended over here, so white kind of still wanted to develop that. That's part of the reason for the jump, although the primary reason was to invade, right? Because compared to other defensive moves, again, repeating the same point. But the problem is this is similar to the jump. It's trying to reduce, but also trying to defend, but does neither one very well. Black can cap again, and this area is growing much bigger than the right we see, right? So it would be much better for white to either just defend, black jumps, white's totally settled now, and then come in with an invasion. Or don't play something here, invade directly, handle the situation, that what white wants to do. I'm not. You notice I'm not talking about what's the best thing to do. I'm talking about from the perspective of the players, what my interpretation of what they're trying to do, and how they could do it better, or the misconceptions that they're doing it with. Because like, personally, I think there's some opening direction problems, but that's not what I want to focus on. Like, I'm saying if you wanted to handle this, right? Like, white could just defend here. I could take points, and there's like a lot of options, but this move to me seems like white wanted to reduce the top area, but it didn't really accomplish that well compared to just a direct invasion, and it didn't defend well compared to just defense. You don't like. We often say we want our moves to do two things, or actually professional level maybe even three things at once, but we want to do them well, right? Doing two things well is good. Doing two things half and half so is usually not as good as just doing one thing completely well by itself, and then because you did that well, you have the freedom, like you don't have to stress about it, or your group is safe, or you handled whatever your priority was. You did that well, and then you can move on to the next area and handle that area like directly without worrying about the rest of the board. Keeps it simpler, much easier to handle. Anyway, so black's very calm here. If we just some players might be like, this is really weird. White's playing on the 6 line. It's not surrounding this. Yeah, and you know, black's making this really ambitious moyo. Sure, it's a little bit unusual. This is actually very common for amateur games, I think, especially at least in the games I've reviewed. But like, if we get out of our like, what do we see a lot type of mentality and just think about, you know, what are they trying to do? How do we handle it? And we see like, oh, white's trying to build the right, but I could build more, right? It's we don't have to think too complicated about it. We can just take it slow. So now white's probably has to come in, because if white just continues this way, and we might say, oh, you know, actually when it goes farther, white is getting more, although black still has even more, right? But the problem is white's position is so big that there's invasions, right? Like even if you defend this stone is still kind of hard to kill, especially if you consider like white with more advanced type of sabaki techniques. Black can make combinations that threaten to live in different ways, and then use one that basically say, oh, you have to kill one of these and then live with one of them. And the difference we see in the moyo structure is black has these reinforcing stones in this moyo. Aside from the fact that black's is bigger, these reinforcing moves make it much harder for white to come in here. Whereas this is a very open space. The corner has a weakness. This is still open, you know? So it's much better development for black. So white has to come in. Okay. So white comes in. Black has a few different options. The most severe way would actually be to lean on one side. Say like, oh, you know, this is yours, and then I'm going to attack this stone pretty severely. That's one possible way. The next move is probably not even possible because the ladder is not good. White could try some sabaki technique, but black's going to get a decently strong shape. And the right side is still like, imagine white somehow lives, black will probably have Sente to come over here and disrupt it. That's a very severe way to play. It's not the only way to play. Black chose, I think, a decently easy way to jump. There's a slight danger here. If you're familiar with your shapes, you know that this cut is often a problem because white can cut through, but in this case black can just resist with the bump because black is so strong around, there's no way for white to fight this. Okay, so just separating is very easy. And we see the problem that white is running into. White played up high, mapping out the right, but once black gets ahead, you know, white does anything, just turning, compressing white down on the right, white actually ends up with a really inefficient means of surrounding that space. White could play here, but then that's fine. It's not bad. But then this stone becomes kind of questionable. Why did we help black reinforce the center when we're just going to go back and make a normal defensive move anyway? So black's very calm. Says, okay, I'm just, in a way this is profiting, right? We don't need to capture this because we're already limiting white on the right. We have a follow-up, taking away white's points. And K12 is still naturally weak. We separated it, we're strong, and white will have to handle it. White could, in theory, just come over here, but even something very simplistic and, you know, let's say white somehow lives. You know, white can't manage 2 areas. It's too far. You can only get really one of them. So white saves the stone. Very natural. Let's see how black answers. Peep. Okay. Want to make white heavy. This could be a good or a bad exchange because we're noticing that now, later, this cut is now harder to do. You can't play this bump after white gets this move. This move removes a potential future liberty from this stone if black ever plays here, which is why this squeeze works. So that might be a bad exchange. I think it'd be better if black just turned, really. Like, this cut is not so important. Like, it doesn't work now, but it's also not important if, like, let's say you just, for some reason, you have to connect like this. If you can move on to the right and make a base for yourself here, it's not so important either. Yeah, so I would just turn here. Or if you want to attack, keep pressuring like this, although it's not clear if you're going to get profit here. This is just an attacking move, so if you're pushing white this way, maybe it's not so great. I think I would just prefer to turn, make the points. Defending is also fine. You made this exchange, makes it hard for black or for white to connect up. Also fine. The peep, I'm thinking, is hurting black shape more than helping. And it makes you feel like I have to defend this now, which is okay, but now you're really committed to this attack, so if you don't get some profit from it, it might be not so great. Black comes back here. That's fine. I still don't like this peep because there's some weaknesses here, so you made white a little bit stronger, even though it's like anytime you make white heavy, it also gets stronger. So yeah, it's you have to be careful. All I can say. White plays here. I think at this point white's getting kind of desperate. They're seeing how big this top area is for black, but playing stuff like this is often a faster way to lose the game. We should take care of our group first. Like, is black gonna really just like play this? This is pretty big, but there's actually still some problems here. It's so high, so maybe black will play here. Is this really threatening? It's big. But once our group is, like, this is not super strong, but it's much safer now. So we can take some time to come over here. Like, if we imagine the same thing from before and white, this is not a real sequence, but I'm just making it because it's simple, right? This is a leaning attack to illustrate how weak the center group, if you wanted to really attack it. But it's actually quite hard to attack because, you know, this stone is almost captured at J11. So white has enough liberty, enough space that after this group is settled, you could start reducing other areas. And if we keep continuing like this, you know, just something simple, people defend stuff, black really only got the top side. That's not so big, is it? You know, white gets another move here. It's still possible to make a game out of this as white. The key thing when you're behind is to not become rash. You have to be calm, take care of your groups, and manage each piece, you know, one at a time. It's kind of like a theme. Just defend, you know, take care of your priorities. Defend the group. Once it's totally fine, you can do something else. You know, everything is piece by piece. White is trying to make complications. You often hear pros when they're losing, they try to make complications. It's true you want to make complications when you're losing because it gives you more opportunity, but you don't want to rush into it, right? Like, there's a difference between making it murky, but to make something murky, it takes a little bit of time. It takes a few moves. If you just throw a stone and try to make it complicated and you don't have a direction or a goal, it has to be like, anytime you do that, it's a risk, right? So the risk has to be proportional to how desperate your situation is. I don't think 24 moves into the game, it's so desperate white has to do this kind of stuff. Maybe 100-something moves, you need to do something a little desperate. If you're losing, you know, 10 points, 5 points at a high level. Lower level, 10 points, 15 points. Maybe do something desperate. Black, I like this move. Very solid. Many players would be like, I want my points. Don't take my points. But then you end up giving a lot more aji to white. And black's, by defending solidly, this group is getting weaker, right? This group gets stronger, which means that the surrounding group gets weaker. Black's not super attached to this top territory. We have to be a little bit careful about our top right group, but that's okay. White plays here. little unusual. If black just extends, I guess white's aiming to cut. I think, what does what? The game black defends, that's also fine. Feels like white has to now defend this, but then black is okay. But white cuts, okay. So now we're getting a little bit dangerous as white. Seems like white was really jealous of this top area. It's funny, in the last game, the black player, Ina, she was the jealous player, but now it seems like white is the jealous player this game. So now we immediately notice, oh, white at first glance might be like, hey, I got into the top, I can probably live here, this is great. And as black, you're like, okay, I let you get into the top, but now you have 2 weak groups. Did you really want to do that? Because notice, sure, black might have lost some potential points at the top, but getting 2 weak groups is an advantage anyway. White has not gained anything for themselves, right? We often talk, I think I mentioned this in the other video. White needs to always be thinking, both players need to be thinking about developing themselves. Only 30 moves into the game, there's still a lot of development to be had. Usually, unless it's a very peaceful opening where everything gets developed easily, this board has lots of open space. This is a very good move. Attack from the base, you already blocked off white's paths for running. So now white's going to have to make a very painful life in here. This looks dead. No, but black, yeah, good choice. Maybe black didn't see that they could kill it, right? This is not clear. I don't think this could live, personally. Like, if you go here, just take away this eye. Go here, like, throw in. Like, this to me, doesn't look like it could live. Maybe black couldn't tell, you know? It's like, I'm not sure if this could live or not. Oh, if you're worried about this Ko thing, I didn't even look at that, so maybe that's also there. This double Atari, but I don't... Might be a little risky. Okay, maybe a little risky. I didn't see that. In which case, for me, maybe just defend, and then white lives in Gote, and then you could attack. But, you know, maybe black wasn't sure. If you're not sure about your reading, choose a plan. A plan is always going to be possible. It'll always be better with more details. The more you read, the better details you'll have, but the plan is always going to be there. Like, the general flow tends to stay the same unless it's a very technical kind of sequence, which Q games not very common, even Dawn games not very common, pro games even not very common. It's like maybe really high pro level or medium pro level. Yeah, then you start getting to those kind of weird, very technical sequences. But generally the flow is going to stay the same. So white chose a plan. White says, okay, looks like this group for now is okay. Maybe later I have a forcing move here, I have a forcing move here, you know. So in the meantime, I'll just make this group weaker, reinforce my left Moyo, and leave these forcing moves as options later. If white plays here, it's in Gote, and I still get to maintain my pressure, or go somewhere else. White always has to handle these stones, or just give them away. If white gives them away, it's very big. White has to handle it, white's not making points. So this is a very calm strategy by black. White decides to save him. I think painful, but not much of a choice, right? Because if you give these up, it's kind of a lot. Black peeps again. I'm not sure I agree with this peep. White, this is bizarre. Even if white connects, we're starting to see maybe in the future there's some weaknesses here, right? White gets out or something, but there's a cut, a potential cut right here. There's some weaknesses that could show up. So maybe better to just, honestly, I just want to play here, approach, or turn here, limit the right, threaten the 3-3 point, so kind of forcing a response out of white. White goes here, just approach, you know, make a base, slowly surround this, like in a general sense, threaten it from afar while also making points, like, or doing things that are also beneficial. This one reduces the right, this one reduces white's bottom side, also maps out a little bit for yourself, all while slowly aiming at these, right? This stone here at 010 means that if white has to jump here in the future, it supports to cut white off. White has to go farther to get out of black's sphere of influence. Same at the bottom. Makes it harder to run straight down. White has to start moving like this, or like this. Can't move easily, right? That's the main idea. But black seems like, okay, make white heavy. Maybe black's plan was jump here and then jump here. That's a natural looking sequence, but I don't like that the thinness is here, but it's also not necessarily bad. If black read out that they could come back and reinforce it in time. Or that they thought that this peep for some reason was really beneficial. I don't think it's so beneficial in this case where you already have these kind of supporting stones, but maybe they thought it was really beneficial. I don't know what this move is. Maybe white wanted to sacrifice to build the bottom. In that case, this just push might be better, right? You know, Atari and just give them up. Bottom's really open. Black's probably going to get Sente. Maybe you could play here. Might be like for the same plan. Maybe just push. Anytime you give your opponent potential places to cut you, probably will be difficult later. So black makes a push to reinforce the cut before coming back to defend. Seems reasonable. I would prefer this way because it extends your liberties much better. White's kind of forced to defend and they could cut. Seems a little bit difficult for white, but maybe possible. White plays here. Really not sure what white's doing. Seems like, I mean, obviously white wants to come into the left and reduce the space, but now you have all these weak points. Does build this area a little bit, but it's unclear to me. Black just defends. Okay, that seems fine. Anytime you don't know what to do, defense is fine. And white peeps, probably going to try to develop the right side. And black cuts. This cut's really good because you don't want to just cut here. This is very small scale. White could just treat these as forcing moves and maybe add a move here or something. But when you cut here, now you're thinking, you know, black is threatening to capture it on a much larger scale while also being on the outside. That's the really key thing. Being on the outside means you're free to control this space over here. Whereas even though if you cut on the inside, like this stone is really weak, right? It only has 2 liberties, but it's hard for black to come here because it still has to go past that stone, right? Still have to play a move here first, and then white can still get the bottom. So important to always, when it's possible, you want to attack on the largest scale possible to put the most pressure and always try to get on the outside. White defends, black Ataris. It looks like a shape move, but if white Ataris, does this really look like a good shape? Making this little kusumi. I think personally I would treat these as light. Just approach, make a group in this moyo. Don't think this is killable at all. Seems very strong. You can even do this kind of thing. If you look at the board, upper left, very big. Top, weak for white, so still some potential stuff there. White only has the right side, and this group is potentially undercut, potentially weak even, if black ever saves these stones here in the center. So yeah, I think so far black's just doing a very good game. These are all very heavy because they're very concerned about saving these stones. Maybe black was focusing a bit too much on trying to keep pressure here. White goes away to reduce. To be honest, at this point, I think the game's hard for white, but black might, considering that these are getting heavy, it might kind of flop. But this exchange is really bad because it hurts the top group, as we see. Limits the ability for white to play there. Hane, okay, cut. I don't see what's wrong with taking. This kind of squeeze is possible, but it's not something black couldn't do anyway. And defend, okay. And take the stones. Pretty good for black. Seems like so these heavy moves paid off because he got the 3 stones. And this might have some connection issues now in the future. Seems like the game's basically decided. I'm just going to quickly breeze through this. Black consolidates the left. White tried to reduce a little, didn't really work. jump in. Attach is very severe. I think you don't have to play that severely. Just defend is fine. This, but attach is severe if it works. That's a nice sequence. Get the co-lock shape. And yeah, now black moves to the right. This is an interesting point. White should generally defend here, and then black makes an extension or something. But black's saying, oh, that's clever. So black knew that white would play here, because this is too cramped and the corner's open. And then it's saying, okay, I'm going to attack this group while keeping the 08 move in reserve. It's an interesting... I think probably black could have just got away with attacking this directly and then naturally moving over, because this has to defend and then this is a much more solid shape. This kind of idea might be a little bit too fancy. Like, in the end, it's not. If we think about the same shape, black could just Hana here, or still needs to, and then R8 looks a little weird. But I get the idea. It's like, it's a cute little trick. So white's basically giving up more stones. I don't think white can win the game now. It's too big. And then black's like, I'm going to live in here. You know, black at this point should count. If we assume just like a simple, like this lives, black can just play here, and then maybe just attach here or something. Even if black just goes down, I think this whole quadrant in this center is way too big. I don't think white can compete at all. Yeah, so I'm just actually going to end the game there. I don't think there's much more. Like, the game goes on a little bit longer. To here, looks like black breaks in. Don't think it's so important. We can just stop it here. I think the main things I want are the more interesting things are thinking about this little center fight, and more importantly, the early judgments on how to handle this top side and this jump. I think these are the more critical parts. I think black definitely got a lead in the opening up to here with the kick in the bottom left. And this exchange becoming a little bit early, right? If we think about it, going back, if we take off these stones, white would much prefer to have it in this shape. Like, of course, or, here, to break up the top moyo. So these exchanges actually came back to hurt white. So that combined with the kick, I think black's opening was better. And then white didn't choose an appropriate strategy to reduce the top side, which snowballed into a bad fight, into white getting desperate, becoming overly desperate, really. I don't think it was so bad until white tried to do too much, because up to a certain level, you can kind of be patient that your opponents are going to make mistakes, and it's always good to have a sort of relative patience. Yeah. So anyway, that wraps up this key review, and I hope you all learned something. I think these kind of mistakes are very common. I'll probably end up saying them a lot more in future reviews. Yeah, but hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.